is Billy Corando. I am a Java developer advocate at Oracle, and you can find me on Twitter at Billy Corando, where really I spend way too much of my time. But don't tell anyone at Oracle that, oh no, Alex is here. The cat's out of the bag. So a couple of things to get started. As Peter was saying, please ask questions. If at some point during the presentation you want me to go into more depth, expand, or I just didn't cover something well, type questions into the chat log, and I'll be monitoring it for any sort of questions that come up, and I'll be more than happy to answer them at the time. And then again, as Peter said, at the end of this, also feel free to unmute yourself, and we can have, like I said, some open mic time for some questions and answers as well. And once again, feel free to reach out to me at Billy Corando on Twitter. You can DM me, or you can also tweet at me, and also feel free to email me as well. And that's already been put into the chat log, but the link to the slides is at my GitHub, so you can check it all out. I actually just uploaded the slides again, so they should all be nice and matching with what you're seeing here as well. Also, if you leave with an intense desire to know more, we have some great content for that. We launched dev.java back when around the same time as Java 17. So that's a project that the evangelist group I'm part at Oracle, we use to help provide tutorials and a bunch of great content for learning Java, learning what's coming next in Java, as well as things for like finding users groups. So SF, or San Francisco Jug, my Jug, Kansas City Jug, and all the jugs around the world. We have like a whole map that covers them. So if your jug isn't there, is anything's incorrect about it, be sure to let us know, and we'll be happy to fix that for you. There's also Inside Java, which is maybe a little bit relevant for this presentation, where we kind of really go into the conversations and what's going on within the world, within the OpenJDK development process, so we can kind of get an idea of like maybe what's coming in the future for Java. And it's also hear from the actual developers of Java as well as to what is kind of going on with that. And one of the best ways is with the Inside Java podcast. Every Monday, well, except for this Monday for a couple of reasons, but I also publish a 1 minute long video called Civic Java. So that's just a great way on various topics on Java I cover. My upcoming video should be here tomorrow. So definitely check that on my Twitter. And then also our YouTube channel, where we publish the Inside Java Newscast and Jeff Cafe. So bunch of great content. Definitely check it all, or check out what's most interesting to you. I think we kind of cover a lot of different angles as well. So it's not just for all the many different ways we all learn. Certainly I've kind of learned to where I really enjoy podcasts. So, or maybe short videos is what's part of the reason I've started doing like this Civic Java stuff. So I think we try to do a bunch of different ways to kind of cover all the different mini audiences out there. All right, with all of the bureaucracy out of the way, let's start actually getting into this presentation, what you're actually really here for. So for the agenda, we're going to be covering three broad things. We're going to be looking at some key language changes that occurred between Java 11 and Java 17. Then we're going to kind of dive in a little bit to the themes of the changes. We're going to kind of see how it's not just, a bunch of cool stuff we thought we would add, but there's actually a goal, an idea that we're actually going towards. And we're going to kind of actually, directly kind of call those out or look at those. And then we're going to go into the future, kind of see where Java might be heading here in the upcoming releases. So let's review some of these key language changes, like I said, between Java 11 and Java 17. The four that I'm going to search on, or to focus on, though by no means is all the language changes, is the updates to switch, pattern matching for instance of records, and then sealed classes. And all these changes, they're being delivered. There's multiple kind of ongoing active projects within OpenJDK, and the project that is delivering these changes is called Project Amber. And the goal of Project Amber is to kind of explore and develop smaller productivity focused Java language features, and also just trying to improve the developer experience as well. Other changes that have been delivered by Amber that I'm not going to be covering tonight is, of course, local variable type inference, which was delivered back in Java 10, which was quite nice when that was delivered. It was also something that was often requested. And actually, one of my also kind of favorite changes was also text blocks. But I'm not going to, again, really focus too much on those, but that was a couple of these other things that have been delivered under Project Amber. So I want to first focus on switch updates. And so these were added in Java 14. And then JEP 361, that stands for JDK Enhancement Proposal. And let's see, hopefully, or let me get one of these up here. So JDK Enhancement Proposal, and you can see them all here if you go to openjdkjava.net JEPs. Let's go back out there. And then if you go to, you type in 361, that is not what I wanted to do. We actually type in 361 here. This will give you a whole explanation behind why a new feature is being added, like a summary of what it is, some maybe history for the previous preview instances of a feature, the motivation behind why the feature is being added, and then, of course, what the actual feature details. So this is a really great source of information about new features that are being added or changes that are being made to the JDK. And I would always highly recommend going here, as it can go into much more depth than really would have time to during a presentation. But JDK enhancement proposals, therefore, when it's like a somewhat substantial new change, I believe it's supposed to be like at least 2 weeks of like dedicated developer time, though I think maybe it could be a bit more, and in some JDK or some JDK or some JEPs can be much more. But some great source of information for that. But yes, switch updates, these were added in Java 14, and it's 361. So where does this kind of come from? We've all, at some point as Java developers, worked with a switch. And of course, we are all used to this, the colon syntax. But there's a lot of noise going on in here where we have to have we need to put a break within each of these case statements to prevent from the accidental fall through. And that's something that came from C that we kind of copied in how this switch would work. But ultimately, it's not really something that most developers want. It's often a source for bugs. How often have we forgotten to put a break in, or maybe we're doing some sort of change and we deleted the break? And now all of a sudden, when case 6 is matched, it then both executes what's happening in case 6, but then also falls down to case 7. It's frustrating. Like I said, every Java developer of enough experience, you've run into this at least once or twice, and even outside of that, it just creates a lot of noise. So switch was expanded to where there's now a more concise way of executing it, where we have these arrow operator, and then only the code to the right of the arrow operator is executed. So not only is this much cleaner, it's a lot less noisy, and then also there's a less opportunity for introducing bugs, because that's a thing we'll talk a little bit later. But sometimes, like when we think about like verbosity, we're thinking about, oh man, it just takes so much typing to do something. And of course, yeah, having to type a bunch is annoying, but really that's not the thing that's going to be interfering with your productivity. But where that verbosity can be a problem is it provides a lot of opportunities for bugs to be introduced into your code. So we can see here that the reduction of verbosity is actually a way of making the code more safe than it was a bit before, or less opportunity to introduce bugs. So along with this is now switches can also be used as an expression to where now with the case, you can actually directly return value from it. In this case, we're returning a string for each day of the week. And these switches, they need to be exhaustive as an expression. So then in this case, this will often mean having to define a default case within it. And in this case, I'm just going to throw an exception if it doesn't match in one of these cases. Now, if you do need to if you want to use the arrow operator, But you do actually have like a case that actually has like somewhat complex logic that you need to execute for it. You are able to execute an entire block of code. In this case, because I'm returning value, I have to, and Alex, you can correct me here, I always forget what to call yield. It's like a reserved local word. It's not a keyword, but pretty much only within the case block will yield be considered like a keyword within it. But if you use yield outside of this context, it's not a reserved word. Um, but yeah, so that is a way you can actually execute multiple lines with a using the arrow operator. In this case, I had to end it with yield because I had this as an expression. But if I was here in this first example of using an arrow operator where I'm not returning any value, you wouldn't, of course, have to put yield within that case then. But a lot of these changes also still apply to the colon syntax. So if you just really like the colon syntax for some reason, you can of course still use that as like a switch expression. You just have to put yield in each of those cases as well. And of course, it would still have to be exhaustive. So in this case, I would have to still put a default operator. However, exhaustiveness is, in this example, let's say I had an enum that covered every day of the week, and then I had a switch where I referenced every different enum within it, then I wouldn't have to put a default case in here because, well, it's exhaustive. It covers every possible value within that enum, so I don't have to put a default in there. And again, that applies also to the colon syntax as well. So the next one I want to focus on, and this is one of the really big themes we're going to be seeing in the future of Java, is pattern matching. In this case, it's pattern matching for instance of added in Java 16, and its JEP is 394. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier, and also I kind of touched on it just briefly, if I could, there we go. So like here within switch expression, there's a history element, and the history here, this isn't like talking about the like history of Java, but it's specifically talking about the two preview instances, or the two rounds of preview that this language feature went through. So now all of these features that are being delivered under Project Amber, they will go through two rounds of preview before they're actually delivered. And it's a way to actually get some feedback by developers to kind of get an idea of like what needs to be changed, what can be improved, and so on. And it's maybe something that, had something like this been available way back when Java was initially being developed, something like Switch probably fall through by default wouldn't have been a thing, because overwhelmingly that's not what developers want. But because we didn't maybe have like this feedback mechanism really, we didn't quite get the opportunity to refine the initial switch statements to be a little bit easier to work with. So that's one of the nice things that's also being delivered that kind of came with the 6-month release cycle, is the ability to do these previews to get feedback from the community before it's actually being delivered. And almost all these features have at least a few changes that happen to them before they're as a result of the previews. So definitely, we are listening, and it is helping to deliver better features at the end of the day. So onwards, talking about pattern matching for instance of, again, like with switch statements, with like having had the breaks and all that, we have all at some point had to do instance of. And here in this case, like you have some sort of either untyped object, or you just have it to where there could just be a bunch of different types for it. And so then you have to do the if, a check to see like, okay, is this a string? Okay, it's a string. And if it's actually a string, then you have to set it and you have to cast it. And again, within this, it's verbose to write it, but there's this opportunities for writing bugs in there, either not setting something properly, or like maybe you have to do like a bunch of checks of these instance of, where you maybe copy and paste it, and in one of them, like you just don't actually set it up correctly, where maybe one you're checking for an int, another one or integer, another one's like a long, another one's a sort or something. And one of them, like you don't update your cast properly, and then you end up, with an error. Like this opportunities are bugs, and just provides a lot of visual noise. So now instance of has been extended to where it can take what's called a pattern variable. And this is what's called pattern matching. If you're not familiar with that, pattern matching is where you take a predicate, in this case, like, is this target here an instance of string? And if this predicate is true, then you assign it a variable, a pattern variable saying, okay, now my string, it's set to that. And then this is what's called, the string is what's called flow scope, which is probably a new concept for many Java developers. But what this means is this pattern variable, now a string, it is in scope wherever the compiler knows that this predicate is true. So in this case, like, it would be in scope within the following if block after this instance of check is being done. So in scope wherever the compiler knows the variable is set. So here, of course, it's set, and like if you wanted to do like an and, be like, okay, now this is actually a string, and like it's not an empty string, and maybe it's all capitals or something like that. You could also do that, but like it wouldn't work if you had like an or operator, because, well, to the right of the or operator, that would mean that the previous check was false. So like it wouldn't be in scope. So it would be scope here within the if block, but then outside of the if block, now it's no longer in scope because the compiler doesn't know if this was actually true or not, because this code, it doesn't have to be true for it to get to here. Also here, for some reason, I wanted just to do an evaluation, like, of course, now my string would be in scope within this evaluation, but would be out of scope outside of it. So that's kind of one of the new concepts, is that it's flow scoped. If you did want to use this value, you would have to set it to a variable of the appropriate scope, within like this if block. The next change I want to cover is records, another feature that was delivered in Java 16, and its JEP is 395. I don't think it's too much to say that like records is probably one of the most significant changes to Java since the introduction of like lambdas and streams back in Java 8. And we're only getting started, and we'll see here in the future of its section later on. But yeah, so here we can see an example where, like, I know this is hard to read. I kind of made it intentionally hard to read, where I have some variables set up here, and I want to, maybe assign them to some sort of class. And if I wanted to define that class actually within like a method, it just becomes completely unreadable because of like having to define like a hash code equals and then accessors and all that. All the meaning is kind of lost within this method. So now within a single line, we can actually define a record that has fields and everything, and then actually use it later on. But, the purpose of records isn't just the reducing of verbosity, of reducing the code, but it is, as Brian Getz put it, is a transparent modeling of data as data. And so what that means is, like, you can just look at the definition of the record and you instantly know what it's doing. It's okay, it's a person, and then it's going to have these 4 fields within it. You're not going to have to actually look into the class to really kind of understand at least the structure of the data of it. But there's also several constraints placed upon records. The first is that its superclass is always going to be Java lang record. The next is that it can't be extended, it can't be abstract, and as a result, it's implicitly final. So like, even if you wanted to put like extends record on this person one, like that would still give you a compiler error because you just can't extend record. All the fields within a record are final, but it's only shallowly immutable. So if one of these fields was an array list or something, the record, there's nothing going to be preventing that list from having elements added or removed from it. But of course, you're not going to be able to assign a different list to it after creating your record object. You also cannot declare instance fields, field initializers, or instance initializers. And again, that gets back to the transparent modeling of data as data, so where you're not going to be forced to go into the class to kind of understand what it's, like a default value that's supposed to be for first name or last name or title or anything like that. You would know when you call the constructor for a person here and you provide values, that's what's going to be actually set for it. And if you don't assign a value for it, then it's not going to have a value. Also, accessors for like all the fields or the components of the record, hash code, toString, and equals, those are all automatically generated, but of course they can be overwritten. But you just want to make sure if you do that, that you're not violating an invariant. You don't want to, have this hash code just return 1 every time. That's just going to, break your system or break your application, because then, hash code isn't going to work properly when it tries to compare it on that. But fundamentally, records are just a class. You can add additional methods to it. Of course, like I said, you can override all these generated methods. Fundamentally, a record is just a class. It does just have a number of constraints put upon it. And again, something we'll see is how those constraints will actually enable some very cool and interesting behavior into the future of Java. Finally, the last change I want to talk about that was delivered in between Java 11 and 17 is sealed classes. And that was added in 17, and the JEP for it is 409. So all of us, again, as developers, like at our organizations, we have certain domain concepts where, it could be transactions, account types. In this example, I have user types, where there's supposed to be only going to be a limited number of them. There might be some sort of relationship between them. And it can be really great to actually then model that in your domain properly, to where, a user, like it can only possibly be a guest, a customer, or an admin, hypothetically. And so in this case, we want to make user a sealed class, and like these markings, the outlines, kind of denote, okay, this is a sealed class. Okay, so like one of them is guest. Well, that's a final class. So like nothing can extend off of it. Customer, well, we'll consider it to say like a non-sealed class, because there could be many different types of customers. And we just want to allow customer to kind of have its own hierarchy that can easily evolve and expand as needed. But maybe admin itself is also a sealed class, to where there could be either a super admin or just a normal admin. And so again, what this all looks like in code is I have like my user class, and then I have the keyword sealed, and then I would also provide a permits clause saying like, okay, user only permits admin, customer, and guest to extend off of it. And then these subclasses, they would either have to be declared as sealed, final, or non-sealed. And so, as I was mentioning, like admin is sealed, and so it only allows super admin or normal admin to extend off of it. Guest, as I mentioned, is final, so there's nothing they can extend guest. And then customer, it's non-sealed, which basically means it's a normal class where anything can extend across customer. Sealed classes can work together great with records. Of course, as I mentioned, records can't be extended, but they can implement an interface. So here you can have like our sealed interface of user, and then we have like the records that all implement this user interface. So that can be a great way of combining records and sealed classes together. And so also, permits is an optional clause. If you were to find if you have a sealed interface or a sealed type, and within that same source file class, or that same source file, if you then define the subclasses for it, you don't have to define the permits clause. In fact, it would be, I believe it gets compile error if I was to put the permits and then also put like admin and guess the customer in it, because that's just been assumed by the compiler that these classes are then the permitted types of this sealed interface. So what are the themes kind of going on in this code? To kind of lay it out, as also maybe I touched on it a little bit while explaining them. Well, one, we're trying to be more expressive. We're trying to make it so meaning of the code can be more easily defined. Kind of like the example of how you can just look at a record to say like, oh, okay, the name of the record and then the fields that are going to be within it, you can just see it just from the definition of the record. You're not going to have to actually dig into any code. Also with like the updates to switch, not having to do a break statement. So again, our break statement to actually that then kind of obfuscates the meaning of the code. And sealed classes, where you can actually define the hierarchical relationship between classes, and then also allow classes to define what can actually extend off of them. Also safer. So with the switch expressions, if you were to add like a new enum or something, you would get a compiler warning saying like, hey, your code's no longer exhaustive because you added a new potential path within it. Also, things like records are going to address a number of security issues when you're dealing with serialization, just because it's also more constrained in what you can do with serialization, which I won't get into too much within that. Also, there's going to be some less concerns with nulls, particularly pattern matching, which we'll be able to better see also here in a few minutes as well. And to also go back to it, it's also about reducing verbosity and ceremony. But as I said, it's not just about the typing, it's about also reducing opportunities for bugs, all that ceremony, all the boilerplate, because you just stop kind of thinking about it. It becomes a distraction to reading, and also can just be one of those really easy things where you forget to put a break statement, or you forget to maybe assign something properly, and then you introduce a bug, and then you're going to have to spend a long night pushing out code to fix that. But also a great quote about this. This is also from Brian Getz, from one of our Inside Java podcasts, and you can see the link to at least the YouTube of it here. It's about making it easier to program in plain data, as applications are kind of maybe shrinking in size or getting more scope specific with like, microservices, serverless functions and things like that. We're more often at the boundaries of data. And so making it easier to actually work with that data will be a huge benefit to developers. So again, these are some of the goals, some of the ideas as to how to actually improve this going forward. Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to get the checks. Yeah, contextual keyword. Thanks for clarifying that, Alex. So the future of Java, what is going to be that? Oh, I don't know how this got in there. I'm sorry, I do not normally paint myself gray and put a strainer in my head to look like a robot. I do want to safe harbor statement is that the future is not written; it can be changed. So as I'm talking about these future language features, I'm not promising where they're going to be delivered. I'm not promising what they're going to look like, particularly as we talk about some of the stuff that's still very kind of foggy and much further out there. Don't like, screenshot this and be like, hey, Billy said it on this day that it was supposed to look like this, or it was going to be delivered on this. Like, it can be changed for things in the future. Certainly as developers, again, we are all used to, deadlines changing or having to change features because you end up running into some sort of issue you weren't expecting. So at least keep that grain of salt, whole handful of salt, particularly for some of this more further feature stuff out in mind when I discuss them. So the first one is pattern matching for switch. So this is the second instance of pattern matching being added to Java. In this case, it's in second preview status for switch, and the jet for it is 420. But yeah, it's going to allow pattern matching to be added to switch. And so here we can see that, like, okay, if we match on the answer case, then we can assign it to the pattern variable of I, and then I would be in scope only to the right of this arrow operator. So like that way you can reuse these variables as well. So like, even though we're using like a different L, D, and S for here, we could easily have this all be X for all these. And the compiler would know that each of these are different actual variables. So you wouldn't have to use different letters, and they would all actually still be different as well within how the compiler understands it. But yeah, it allows it to be more easily just saying like matches on integer, it's I, and then you can then better work with that within the case of that. But also, we could do guarded patterns to where, okay, we match on triangle, and instead of like having within like this case here to put like an if statement and then say like if it's larger than 100, we'll print something out, but if it's not, then we'll print something else out. You can actually put with that within the case itself, the case label, to say reference the pattern variable to then do some sort of additional check on it. Also, we can handle null as well. So if there's a case where like, okay, if it's null, then you want to have that to print something out or to have some sort of behavior happen, that can be handled as well. But now we're also going to see how a lot of these new language features are going to also kind of build upon one another. So we were talking about sealed classes earlier. Now, switch with the pattern matching being added to it, it can also be aware of a seal or of seal types. So now it can know if I cover all the subtypes of user, all the permitted subtypes of user, in this case, admin, guest, and customer, I don't have to provide a default case then within switch because it knows that all the possible different code paths are being covered because it knows that nothing else can extend off of user besides admin, guest, and customer. And then again, that kind of goes back to the safer part of this is where if you didn't have that, to where if you did end up adding a new seal type for user, you could have that, and then you could end up running into an issue. You can end up running into an issue. Whereas if you added this, you would get a compiler warning saying that, hey, there's a new type that has been added, so you have to actually then cover that. So that kind of gets back to the safety element of it. So yeah, if I didn't cover all the different subtypes, I would get a compiler error saying that it's not exhaustive. Also, we're going to be seeing record patterns and array patterns. Currently, this JEP is in candidate status as we have hit ramp down phase 1 for JDK 18 a week or two ago. It's definitely not going to be in JDK 18, so it's going to be in 19 or sometime later. Again, I'm not saying it's going to be in 19. It's definitely not going to be in 18 because we're in ramp down phase, and so it's been branched off of main. But to see what record patterns and array patterns look like, so imagine we have these 3 records and an enum defined. And so normally how we would handle this is like, okay, we'd have the argument of rectangle and like, okay, we would check to make sure rectangle, it's not null. Then we'll, get the colored point out of it from the rectangle. And then we would first to make check sure it's not null. And then we would print out the color of whatever that colored point was. Again, a lot of ceremony, opportunities for bugs to kind of hop up there. Or we wanted to make it look prettier, so maybe we just do rectangle ul color, and then like we end up getting some like null pointer exceptions as well. So what we can now do with like pattern matching for instance of is say like, oh, if this rectangle, or by its nature, if it's instance of rectangle, that means it can't be null. So then we can have it be a little bit safer in that way. We're not gonna have to put that extra null check. But then we still do like another null check here. I guess we could do the instance of, but it's still a bit messy. So we can further simplify this to where if we can do our instance of check, and then we can directly reference the fields within record to actually pull the variables out and reference them directly that way. So that way, we don't have to have the null check here. Because it would have to be not null for that to be pulled out. Actually, I think it would have to have a null check here, but we can just further expand this out to where we can do instance of rectangle, and then we can reference the color point record and just directly reference a field within that color point here, to where it's null safe, and then it's just much quicker to say like, or much easier. Sorry, my mouse can be a little bit jumpy at times, jumping me ahead, but yeah, we don't have to add all the null checks. It's null safe. And we can just see like the only thing that we really care about is printing out the color within a colored point element. And that's just easier for the developer to read, to get directly to that meaning of what you're trying to do. For record patterns, what we can then do, or not record patterns, but for the array patterns, is we can also directly reference elements within that array. So here, if it's an instance of a string array, we can directly reference, say, or assign a variable to that corresponds to that element within the array, which you can see can make it for a little bit cleaner in this area, though this example maybe isn't the best example of it. To where maybe if you had like an array of records, to where we can kind of solve something like this, to where you can reference a record and then maybe even fields within that record as well, to really kind of cut down on some of the code and some of them ceremony to get to maybe specific elements within a record. And this also would work on multi-dimensional arrays as well. So multi-dimensional array, and I can reference both within the like, you know, the 2 tiers down within the multi-dimensional array as well. Oh, sorry, I think that's a copied slide. So yeah, that's some of the more near feature stuff. That's the stuff that, you know, it's either already in preview status or has a candidate JEP for it. But what's going to be coming maybe a little bit farther out into the future. So one of them would be enhanced arrays, to where, yeah, we could like, instead of, so like right now with like this array pattern, like you would have to cover all the different possible elements within the array of what you want to get into, or at least for that. And like, if you are really interested in the last element or the last couple of elements, well, you would actually, it would be very difficult to work with, or at least kind of a bit of a pain to work with. But with enhanced arrays, we can just set it to where, like, okay, I only care about the second to last and last element within the array, so I can get the length of the array. And then, you know, of course, arrays are 0 based, so if I'm gonna get the last one, you know, the length -1, or the second to last one, length -2. So that becomes a lot easier to kind of work with than actually having to progressively like go through all the potential elements, which you may not actually care about. There could also be what's called like the don't care pattern. So let's say I want to, like, I have a record and there's just a bunch of different fields within that record. And I really only care in this case maybe about the first field within that record, like X or something. Maybe we would allow it to where it could be like an underscore, just to say like, I don't care about this, it doesn't matter, but, you know, just to fulfill that there's other fields within this record, and then return the X or return -1. Or it could just possibly just be matching directly on that field. Again, this is still undefined, or it's still up in the air. So, you know, how this will work, it might change, or of course it may not be delivered at all, if maybe there could be some sort of issue with how this would actually work in the code. Destructuring patterns is another thing that we're going to kind of be seeing added, to where, again, we can just directly reference elements within a record to pull them out, instead of actually, you know, having to get like insert I and then, you know, and then referencing the field I within it. We can just directly reference that field within the record. In this example, within a switch expression of doing that. And we can kind of see how it makes it super easy to kind of do circular referencing within it, to be like, to eval this stuff down, just to really easily define it. And then one of them also, we might see also pattern matching in for each loops. And so like, let's say we are going through the entry set within a map. Like right now, like you would then assign that to E and then reference like the key and then a value of that entry. But instead now, with potentially a pattern matching for each loops, we could then just directly reference the elements within entry, instead of actually having to handle a separate entry type as well. So there's, of course, several other active JDK projects besides Amber. And some of the more prominent ones, I'm sure many people have also heard about Loom, which is adding virtual threads to the JVM to hopefully greatly improve parallelization. And that way we maybe don't have to depend upon reactive programming if we need to have like that very high concurrency need within our applications. There's also Project Valhalla, which is going to be improvements of value types, generics, and then also to do this to better align to memory usage for modern hardware and some more. And like some of these things like Project Valhalla might also work a little bit with like Project Amber, where we might eventually see something like a value record down the line, but again, very far down the line, if at all possible. So not making promises, but that's just how some of these projects may also interact with each other in some ways. And then finally, we have Project Panama, and that's for improving non-Java API interfaces. All of these, so we can get early access builds for JDK 18, Loom, Panama, and Valhalla at these links. So that's a way to kind of work with them just to see what's coming, to see how it might improve its organization or how it might just actually work with some of the stuff you're doing right now. So definitely check those out, because again, it's great for us to get feedback to make sure that what we're delivering is actually going to, fit developer needs. With that said, thank you, and definitely unmute your mic at this point, and we can have some open mic time for some Q&A. Or of course, also feel free to type any questions into the chat.
All right, folks, this is your moment. Go for, let's let Billy get a sip of tea, formulate some answers, and if nothing leaping to mind, not to worry. You can always hit him up on Twitter, but we've also got some, good time to ask questions. So please feel free to jump in. Can we, Sarah and Tony, can we allow people to unmute themselves?
Tony's on it.
Sweet. All right. So folks, you should have the ability to unmute yourselves momentarily here. This might take a moment as we execute that. So feel free to use the chat or just jump in. And while we're waiting, curious, who is on Java 17 already? Just say something in the chat, say boo, give me a wave, an emoji, whatever. Just curious, like what folks are using these days. This probably would have been a great idea for a poll now that I think about it. Billy, missed opportunity there, but just curious to know, why don't you shout out what version of, what version of Java you're on in the chat.
Yeah.
It's also a way of letting us know that you are still in fact here.
And everyone should have the opportunity to unmute themselves now.
Okay.
Lovely. Okay. So folks, time to wake up. This is it. Good time to ask questions. If not, we're probably going to let Billy get on with the rest of his evening, and call it a wrap unless Billy has more content. But call for questions. I've got one actually. Billy, is what's the next LTS after Java 17? Is it indeed 19? Or am I got it wrong?
No, it definitely won't be 19. So Oracle, we put forward like the idea of potentially doing an LTS every 2 years, which would be every 4 releases. So that
every 4 releases. Okay,
that would be
proposed
proposed right now to be 21.
Right.
Though, yeah, I don't want to get too deep into that because
totally fine. Just curious. Didn't mean to.
No, you're fine. It's definitely one of those. A lot of those decisions are at a higher level.
Indeed. No, I get that. And for anyone listening, LTS is the long-term support version of Java. So that means, end of life, in terms of support and maintenance and patches and stuff like that is significantly extended. versus what you might experience with more intermediate Java versions. So good for sort of targeting your production migrations and planning cycles around in terms of staying current and keeping tech debt to a minimum.
Nice. Cool. Glad to hear. So Jeremy is upgrading to, or he's on Java 8 but upgrading to 17. So that's awesome. I hope that.
Wow. All right.
Goes well. Yeah.
That's Java, almost Java times 2 plus 1. Not bad.
It is very much so.
That's great, Jeremy. Yeah, exactly. Cool. All right. Anyone else? What version of Java are you on today in terms of projects you're working on, or anything you have deployed in production? Or do you have questions for Billy about the content you've seen tonight? Or
if not, definitely said you can reach out to me on Twitter or send me an email. Actually, when I previously gave this presentation, someone reached out about a few questions as well around pattern matching. So I'll definitely, respond to any of the questions you send if you just end up thinking about something a little bit later on.
Cool. All right. Well, you've got his email address there on the screen, so he cannot escape.
Exactly.
But thank you very much, Billy, for coming tonight. Really appreciate you. You're getting some love from the folks in the Zoom here.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
And folks, let's we'd love to hear from you about what you want to hear from the Oracle Evangelist team. Do you want to hear more about Java language features? Do you want to hear more about JVM languages? Other JVM languages, like what kind of topics are you interested in? We're going to be working on some survey stuff so that you can it's easier for you to tell us what you want to hear about. But this it gets a little boring with me kind of just doing the content program all the time. I'd really love to hear from folks out there what they want to know about. Right on, Andreas. We actually did just have a session last month that was very Kotlin and even a hint of Scala last month with James Ward and Bruce Eckel. We had a just real powerhouse duo. If you never heard of those folks, you've been living under a rock. Just kidding. Just go back in the YouTube channel and you'll see some really good stuff about Kotlin. Although it's been a while since I had a really brute force update on that. That's a good point. So might be worth. Oh, too soon. Oh, that's brutal. Ouch. Ooh, too soon. It's funny you say that. Actually, I was like emailing my InfoSec department tonight at DataStax, and they're like, "Yeah, we're phenomenally unavailable for the next 2 weeks because of that Log4j vulnerability. Log4j is everywhere. Hopefully y'all haven't gotten hit by that too hard. But yeah, that one, oof, that's a brutal one. Log4j is literally like everywhere in Java. Okay. All right. So it seems like we don't have any questions for you, Billy. You have beaten everyone into stunned silence with your amazing presentation. And we really,
I guess I just answered every possible question. So that's what I'm taking this.
That's right. We appreciate you coming by, and look forward to having you back.